The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past 9:30 p.m. as 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez clutched her favorite stuffed elephant, watching cartoons on the old television in their cramped Phoenix apartment. The Arizona heat still radiated through the thin walls, making the small living space feel like an oven. Emma's mother, Maria, moved nervously around the kitchen, glancing repeatedly at her phone. Her boyfriend, Tony Vasquez, had been drinking since he arrived home from work, and Maria could feel the familiar tension building in the air like an approaching thunderstorm. "Where's my dinner, woman?" Tony's voice cut through the apartment like a knife. Emma looked up from her cartoon, instinctively sensing the danger in his tone. She had learned to read these moments, the way her mother's shoulders tensed, the way Tony's voice got deeper and meaner when he'd been drinking from those brown bottles that made him smell funny. "I'm making it now, Tony. Just give me a few more minutes," Maria replied softly, her hands trembling as she stirred the pasta on the stove. She had worked a double shift at the diner and was exhausted, but she knew better than to mention that. Any excuse would only make things worse. Tony stumbled into the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Emma noticed how he moved differently. When he drank like a monster from her nightmares, unpredictable and scary. "A few more minutes?" he snarled, grabbing Maria's wrist. "I've been waiting an hour. What kind of woman can't even have dinner ready for her man?" Emma's little heart began racing. She slid off the couch and crept toward the kitchen, staying low behind the counter. Her elephant clutched tight against her chest. She peered around the corner. Her mother was trying to pull away from Tony, but his grip was too strong. "Please, Tony, you're hurting me," Maria whispered, trying not to wake the neighbors. They lived in a rough complex where people minded their own business, but she still held on to hope that someone might help if things got too bad. That's when everything exploded. Tony's hand flew across Maria's face with a sharp crack that echoed through the small apartment. Emma gasped, covering her mouth with her tiny hand. She watched in horror as her mother stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. A pot of boiling pasta crashed to the floor, sending scalding water and noodles everywhere. "Look what you did now," Tony roared, his face twisted with rage. "You stupid." His words were filled with language Emma didn't understand, but the hatred in his voice made her whole body shake. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't block out the sounds. The terrible thudding noise as Tony's fist connected with something or someone. Her mother's cries of pain, the crash of breaking dishes, the sound of furniture being thrown around. Emma pressed herself against the kitchen cabinet, making herself as small as possible, wishing she could disappear completely. "Stop, please stop." Maria's voice was desperate now, filled with pain and terror. Emma opened her eyes and saw her mother on the floor, her face bleeding, trying to protect herself as Tony stood over her. The little girl wanted to run to her. Mommy wanted to help somehow, but her legs felt frozen. All she could do was watch as the man who sometimes gave her candy and watched movies with them turned into a monster. This wasn't the first time Tony had hurt her mother, but it had never been this bad, never been this scary. Then came the sound that would change everything, the sharp wail of police sirens, growing louder and louder. Someone in the neighboring apartment had finally called 911. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman next door, had heard the commotion and couldn't ignore it any longer. Tony's head snapped toward the window. "Shut up," he hissed at Maria, who was curled on the floor, sobbing quietly. "If you said anything to anyone, I swear I'll—" The pounding on the front door was thunderous. "Phoenix police, open up." Tony panicked, looking around wildly. He grabbed a beer bottle and smashed it against the wall, the glass exploding everywhere. "This is all your fault," he screamed at Maria before stumbling toward the back door. The front door burst open with a crash that shook the entire apartment. Officer Jake Morrison stepped through the doorway, his hand on his weapon, followed closely by his canine partner Bruno. The German Shepherd was massive, weighing nearly 90 pounds, with alert ears and intelligent brown eyes that immediately scanned the chaotic scene. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Officer Morrison called out, rushing to Maria's side. Two more officers flooded in behind him, securing the scene and pursuing Tony, who had fled through the back door into the night. Emma remained frozen behind the counter, watching as these strangers in blue uniforms filled her home. The big dog with the police officers scared her at first. He was enormous, bigger than any dog she'd ever seen. But something about the way he moved was different from Tony's violent energy. The dog was calm, controlled, purposeful. While Officer Morrison radioed for an ambulance and his partner processed the scene, Bruno did something unexpected. The highly trained police dog, who had been taught to track suspects and detect drugs, seemed to sense something else in the apartment. His keen nose picked up the scent of fear and innocence. Slowly, deliberately, he began moving toward the kitchen counter where Emma was hiding. Emma's eyes grew wide as the massive dog approached her hiding spot. She held her breath, clutching her stuffed elephant even tighter. But when Bruno reached her, he didn't bark or growl. Instead, he lowered his great head and looked at her with those gentle brown eyes. Something magical happened in that moment. Despite all the chaos, despite the sirens and shouting and her mother's tears, Emma felt a strange sense of safety wash over her. The dog's presence was like a warm blanket, protective and comforting. Without fully understanding why, she reached out one tiny hand and touched Bruno's soft fur. The connection was instantaneous and profound. Bruno, trained to serve and protect, recognized a victim who needed his help. Emma, traumatized and terrified, found an anchor in the storm. As paramedics arrived to treat her mother and police officers continued their work, the little girl and the police dog formed a bond that would soon prove more powerful than anyone could imagine. Neither Emma nor Bruno knew it yet, but this moment of connection in a shattered apartment would eventually lead them both into a courtroom, where a child's courage and a dog's loyalty would deliver justice and change legal history forever. Detective Sarah Walsh had been working child trauma cases for 8 years, but she had never encountered anything quite like Emma Rodriguez. 2 weeks had passed since that violent night in the Phoenix apartment, and the little girl hadn't spoken a single word. Not to her mother, not to the social workers, not to the team of child psychologists brought in to help. Emma had retreated into a world of complete silence, her bright 3-year-old personality buried beneath layers of trauma. The detective sat in her cluttered office at the Phoenix Police Department, reviewing the case file for the 100th time. The evidence against Tony Vasquez was substantial blood evidence, broken furniture, Maria's medical records showing 3 broken ribs and a fractured jaw. But the district attorney, Michael Chun, had made it clear, without Emma's testimony about what she witnessed, their case was weak. Vasquez's high-powered defense attorney was already arguing that Maria's injuries could have been caused by her falling down, and without the child's account of the actual assault, they might not get a conviction. This guy has walked free twice. Before on domestic violence charges, Detective Walsh muttered to herself, studying Vasquez's criminal history. We can't let him slip away again. The problem was Emma. Every attempt to interview her had ended the same way: tears, silence, or complete withdrawal. Dr. Amanda Foster, the department's child psychologist, had tried every technique in her arsenal. They'd used anatomically correct dolls, art therapy, play therapy, even brought in Emma's favorite foods and toys. Nothing worked. Detective Walsh remembered her first attempt to speak with Emma at the Children's Hospital. The little girl had been curled up in the oversized hospital bed, clutching that same stuffed elephant from the night of the attack. Her dark eyes were vacant, staring at nothing, as if she had disappeared somewhere deep inside herself, where the scary things couldn't reach her. "Hi, Emma," Detective Walsh had said gently, sitting in the small chair beside the bed. "My name is Sarah. I'm a police officer, and I help people who get hurt. Can you tell me your name?" Emma had simply stared through her, as if the detective wasn't even there. When Dr. Foster tried to engage her with picture books about feelings, Emma would turn away. When social worker Janet Mills brought in art supplies, Emma wouldn't even touch them. The trauma had locked her voice away completely. The interviews at the Children's Advocacy Center hadn't gone any better. A specially designed facility on Thomas Road was created specifically for situations like this: colorful walls painted with cheerful murals, comfortable furniture sized for children, and rooms equipped with one-way mirrors so prosecutors and investigators could observe without intimidating young witnesses. Detective Walsh had watched from behind the glass as eyes. Dr. Foster tried again and again to reach Emma. The child would sit perfectly still in the small chair, her hands folded in her lap, looking like a tiny statue. Sometimes she would cry silently, tears rolling down her cheeks without making a sound. Other times, she would rock back and forth, humming a wordless tune that broke everyone's hearts. "She's protecting herself the only way she knows how," Dr. Foster had explained after another unsuccessful session. In her mind, if she doesn't talk about it, maybe it didn't really happen. She's trapped between wanting to help her mother and being terrified of the memories. But Detective Walsh refused to give up. She had seen what monsters like Tony Vasquez were capable of, and she knew that without consequences, they only got bolder and more dangerous. Maria Rodriguez was recovering physically, but she lived in constant fear that Tony would return. He had been released on bail pending trial, and despite the restraining order, both Maria and the police knew that a piece of paper wouldn't stop a man who had already proven capable of such violence. That's when Detective Walsh remembered Officer Jake Morrison's report from the night of the incident. He had mentioned something unusual, how his canine partner Bruno had immediately gravitated toward Emma, and how the child had seemed calmer in the dog's presence. It was a small detail in a report full of evidence and witness statements, but now it seemed significant. The Phoenix Police Department had recently implemented a victim assistance program that included therapy dogs. The concept was still relatively new, using specially trained dogs to provide emotional support for trauma victims during interviews and court proceedings. Detective Walsh had attended the training sessions, but hadn't yet worked a case where the therapy dogs were needed. Bruno was one of 3 dogs in the program. Unlike his primary role as a narcotics detection dog, his secondary training focused on victim support. He had been selected for the dual role because of his exceptionally gentle temperament and his ability to read human emotions. The German Shepherd had undergone months of specialized training to remain calm in high-stress situations and to provide comfort to distressed individuals. Detective Walsh picked up her phone and dialed Officer Morrison's extension. "Jake, it's Sarah Walsh. I need to ask you about that domestic violence case from 2 weeks ago, the Rodriguez family. You mentioned in your report that your dog showed interest in a little girl." "Yeah, that was strange," Morrison replied. "Bruno's trained to focus on evidence and suspects, but that night he kept going back to the kid. She was hiding behind the kitchen counter, scared out of her mind, but when Bruno approached her, she actually reached out and touched him. I've never seen him respond to a victim like that. Would you be willing to bring Bruno to the Children's Advocacy Center? We're having trouble getting Emma to talk, and I'm wondering if your dog might help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You think a police dog could help with witness interviews?" "I think," Detective Walsh said slowly, "that right now, Bruno might be the only one who can reach this little girl. And if we can't reach her, a violent man is going to walk free to hurt someone else. Officer Morrison was quiet for a moment, considering the unusual request. When do you want to try? The next morning, Detective Walsh stood outside the Children's Advocacy Center with a mixture of hope and desperation. This was their last chance. If Emma couldn't find her voice, Tony Vasquez would likely walk free, and Maria and Emma would never truly be safe. The detective took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and pushed open the door. Inside, a little girl and a police dog were about to discover that sometimes the strongest connections are formed between the most unlikely friends. Officer Morrison was already waiting in the lobby with Bruno, who sat calmly at his side, his intelligent brown eyes alert and ready. She's in room 3, Dr. Foster said quietly. Same as always, she hasn't said a word all morning. Detective Walsh nodded grimly. Let's see if Bruno can work a miracle. The Children's Advocacy Center felt different that Tuesday morning. Dr. Amanda Foster had arrived early, rearranging the familiar interview room with nervous energy. She moved the small table closer to the window, adjusted the colorful cushions on the child-sized chairs, and checked the hidden cameras for the third time. Everything had to be perfect. This was their final attempt to reach Emma Rodriguez, and failure wasn't an option. Detective Sarah Walsh paced the hallway outside, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Through the one-way glass, she could see Emma sitting in her usual spot, the small blue chair in the corner, her stuffed elephant pressed against her chest, staring at absolutely nothing. The 3-year-old looked even smaller than usual in her yellow sundress, her dark hair pulled back with butterfly clips that her mother had carefully chosen that morning. She's been like this for 20 minutes, whispered Janet Mills, the social worker who had brought Emma in. Maria dropped her off with such hope in her eyes. She keeps asking when her baby will start talking again. Officer Jake Morrison stood at the end of the hallway with Bruno, both of them waiting for the signal. The German Shepherd seemed to sense the importance of the moment, sitting perfectly still but alert. His ears perked forward as if he could hear Emma's silent distress from down the hall. His thick coat was perfectly groomed, his service vest clean and professional, but there was something almost gentle in his brown eyes that set him apart from other police dogs. Are you sure about this? Morrison asked Detective Walsh quietly. I mean, Bruno's great with victims, but she's just a baby. What if we make things worse? Detective Walsh took a shaky breath. Jake, we've tried everything else. Child psychologists, art therapy, play therapy, music therapy. Emma hasn't spoken one word in 2 weeks. Without her testimony, Tony Vasquez walks free, and you know what that means. He'll escalate. Next time, Maria might not survive. Through the glass, they watched as Dr. Foster entered the room with her usual gentle approach. Good morning, Emma, she said softly, settling into the chair across from the little girl. Did you have breakfast this morning? Your mommy said you liked pancakes. Emma didn't respond. She didn't even blink. It was as if she existed in a world completely separate from everyone around her, trapped in a bubble of silence and fear that no adult had been able to penetrate. Dr. Foster tried for 10 more minutes, using every technique in her extensive training. She showed Emma picture books about emotions, offered her favorite toys, even pulled out a tablet with colorful games designed for children with trauma. Nothing. Emma remained frozen in her protective shell. Should we bring in Bruno now? Morrison asked, noting the defeat creeping into Dr. Foster's body language. Detective Walsh nodded grimly. It's now or never. Officer Morrison opened the door to the interview room, but he stayed in the hallway. Bruno, responding to his subtle hand signal, walked slowly into the room alone. The moment the dog crossed the threshold, something extraordinary happened. Emma's head snapped up. For the first time in 2 weeks, there was actual awareness in her dark eyes. She blinked rapidly, as if waking up from a deep sleep, and her grip on the stuffed elephant loosened slightly. Bruno moved with incredible intuition, approaching slowly and deliberately. This wasn't the same confident police dog who tracked criminals and detected narcotics. This was a healer, a comforter, a protector who understood exactly what this tiny human needed. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the massive dog came closer. Behind the one-way glass, Detective Walsh held her breath. Dr. Foster remained perfectly still, not wanting to break whatever magic was happening. Bruno stopped about 3 feet from Emma's chair and simply sat down. He didn't try to approach further, didn't make any sudden movements. He just existed in the space with her, radiating calm stability. His intelligent eyes never left her face, as if he was communicating something that no human had been able to convey. "You're safe now. I'm here to protect you." Minutes passed in absolute silence. Then, so slowly that the adults watching almost missed it, Emma slid down from her chair. She took one tentative step toward Bruno, then another. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing her to control the interaction completely. When Emma was close enough, she reached out one tiny hand and touched Bruno's soft ear. The contact was electric. The dog's tail gave the slightest wag, and Emma's face showed the first hint of expression anyone had seen since the night of the attack. "Doggy," she whispered, so quietly that Dr. Foster almost didn't hear it. Detective Walsh grabbed Officer Morrison's arm. "Did she just?" "She spoke." Morrison breathed. She actually spoke, but Emma wasn't finished. She knelt down beside Bruno, her small hand still touching his fur, and something remarkable happened. The words began to flow, not to the adults in the room, but directly to the dog, as if Bruno was the only one who could truly understand. "You're the police doggy from my house," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "You were there when the scary man hurt Mommy. You're not scared of bad guys, are you?" Bruno's response was perfect. He lowered his great head and gently nuzzled Emma's cheek as if confirming her words. "Yes, I'm here. Yes, I remember. Yes, I'm brave enough for both of us." Emma wrapped her arms around Bruno's neck, and for the first time since the attack, she began to cry, not the silent tears of trauma, but the healthy, cleansing sobs of a child who finally felt safe enough to let her emotions out. "The scary man was really mean to Mommy," she told Bruno through her tears. "He hit her, and she fell down, and there was blood. And I was scared, and I hid, but I saw everything, and it was so scary. But you came with the other police, and you made it stop." Dr. Foster's eyes filled with tears as she witnessed this breakthrough. In 20 years of working with traumatized children, she had never seen anything like it. The connection between Emma and Bruno was deeper than therapy, stronger than medicine. It was pure trust, the kind that only exists between a child and an animal who asks for nothing but offers everything. Detective Walsh knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Emma had found her voice, and with it, they finally had hope for justice. But more importantly, a little girl who had been lost in darkness had found her way back to the light, guided by a four-legged guardian angel who understood that sometimes healing begins with a gentle touch and unconditional acceptance. The breakthrough had happened. Now the real work could begin. The Maricopa County Superior Court had never seen anything like the motion hearing that was about to unfold. Judge Patricia Hawkins, a 20-year veteran of the bench and mother of 3, sat behind her imposing desk reviewing the most unusual request of her career. The prosecution wanted to allow a 3-year-old witness to testify alongside a German Shepherd therapy dog. The defense was calling it a circus act designed to manipulate the jury's emotions. Defense attorney Marcus Klein paced his downtown Phoenix office like a caged tiger. His expensive Italian suit wrinkled from a sleepless night of preparation. His client, Tony Vasquez, sat across from him, chain-smoking cigarettes despite the number-smoking policy. Vasquez had walked free from domestic violence charges twice before, thanks to Klein's aggressive tactics and legal technicalities. But this case felt different, and Klein didn't like different. "They're desperate," Klein told his client, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Using a baby and a dog in court? It's theatrical nonsense. Judge Hawkins is too smart to fall for emotional manipulation." But Tony Vasquez wasn't buying it. He had seen the look in little Emma's eyes that night, the look of a witness who had seen everything. "That kid knows what she saw, Marcus. If she talks ... double quotes. She won't," Klein interrupted. "She's 3 years old. Children that age can't distinguish between reality and fantasy. I'll tear apart any testimony she gives, dog or no dog." Meanwhile, across town in the district attorney's office, prosecutor Lisa Martinez was fighting the most important battle of her career. Michael Chun had made it clear that this case needed to result in a conviction. Tony Vasquez had been escalating his violent behavior for years, and law enforcement was convinced he would eventually kill someone. The precedent we're trying to set is unprecedented in Arizona, Martinez explained to her team during an emergency morning briefing. No court in this state has ever allowed a therapy dog to accompany a child witness during testimony. We're asking Judge Hawkins to make legal history. Assistant District Attorney James Park looked up from the stack of legal briefs he'd been reviewing. The defense is going to argue prejudicial impact. They'll claim the dog's presence will make the jury more sympathetic to the child's testimony, affecting their ability to weigh evidence objectively. And they're probably right, Martinez admitted. But Emma Rodriguez cannot testify without that dog. She's tried 3 more times since her breakthrough with Bruno, and every time, the moment they're separated, she shuts down completely. Dr. Foster's psychological evaluation is crystal clear. Removing Bruno from the equation would re-traumatize the child. Detective Sarah Walsh entered the conference room carrying a fresh stack of documentation. "I just got off the phone with victim services programs in 12 other states. California, Colorado, and Washington have all used therapy dogs in courtrooms for child witnesses. The success rate is remarkable, and appellate courts have consistently upheld the practice." Martinez felt a surge of hope. "What about constitutional challenges? None that have been successful. The key is demonstrating that the dog's presence is necessary for the witness to testify at all, not just to make them more comfortable. In Emma's case, we have clear medical evidence that she literally cannot function without Bruno's presence." The team spent the morning preparing their arguments, but everyone knew the real battle would be fought in Judge Hawkins' chambers. The judge had requested a private hearing with both legal teams before making her decision, and her reputation for being both compassionate and strictly constitutional made her ruling impossible to predict. At 2 p.m. sharp, both legal teams gathered in Judge Hawkins' chambers. The room was lined with law books and family photos, creating an atmosphere that was both professional and personal. The judge studied the faces before her, understanding that her decision would impact not only this case, but potentially change legal procedures throughout the state. "Mr. Klein," she began, "I've reviewed your motion to exclude the therapy dog. Present your argument." Klein stood confidently, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had won dozens of similar battles. "Your Honor, the presence of a police dog during testimony would be inherently prejudicial. The jury will see a child with a uniformed police animal and automatically assume the child is telling the truth. It's emotional manipulation of the worst kind." He continued his argument with surgical precision, citing case law about the need for objective testimony and the dangers of allowing anything that might influence a jury's emotions rather than their rational evaluation of evidence. Furthermore, Your Honor, 3-year-old children are notoriously unreliable witnesses. Their testimony is often fantasy, mixed with fragmented memories. Adding a dog to the equation doesn't make their testimony more accurate. It just makes it more sympathetic. Judge Hawkins listened without interruption, taking careful notes. When Klein finished, she turned to the prosecution. Ms. Martinez, the defense raises valid concerns about jury prejudice. How do you respond? Martinez stood, holding Emma's psychological evaluation. Your Honor, this isn't about making testimony more sympathetic. This is about making testimony possible at all. Dr. Foster's evaluation clearly states that Emma Rodriguez cannot function in stressful situations without her therapy animal. Without Bruno's presence, there will be no testimony. She opened the file and began reading key passages. Dr. Foster writes, Emma exhibits severe anxiety, selective mutism, and dissociative episodes when separated from the therapy dog. Her psychological dependence on the animal is not preference but necessity. Removing the dog would constitute re-traumatization and would render the child unable to communicate. Martinez looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, we're not asking you to allow something that will make the jury feel sorry for this child. We're asking you to allow something that will make it possible for this child to speak at all. Without Bruno, Emma Rodriguez has no voice. The room fell silent as Judge Hawkins considered both arguments. She thought about her own children, about the balance between protecting the innocent and preserving the integrity of the legal system. She thought about other children who might find themselves in similar situations if she set the wrong precedent. I'll need time to review the precedents from other states, she finally said. This court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for my ruling. As both legal teams filed out of her chambers, Judge Hawkins remained at her desk, staring at Emma's photograph. Tomorrow's decision would determine whether a 3-year-old girl would have her day in court, and whether justice would finally catch up with a man who had spent years terrorizing women. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of courtroom 4B as media crews gathered outside the Maricopa County Superior Court building. Word had leaked about the unprecedented case, a 3-year-old witness testifying alongside a police therapy dog. CNN, ABC, and local Phoenix news stations had sent their best reporters, understanding they were about to witness legal history in the making. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Judge Patricia Hawkins had made her ruling at 9 a.m. sharp, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly as she announced her decision. After careful consideration of precedents from other states and the unique circumstances of this case, I am allowing the therapy dog to remain with the witness during testimony. The court finds that the child's ability to testify outweighs concerns about potential prejudicial impact. Defense attorney Marcus Klein had immediately objected, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, this sets a dangerous precedent. We'll be appealing this decision immediately. Your objection is noted and overruled, Mr. Klein, Judge Hawkins had replied firmly. This court will not prevent a child witness from having the support necessary to tell her truth. Now, 3 hours later, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. The gallery was filled with domestic violence advocates, legal professionals, and curious citizens who had somehow managed to secure seats. Court reporter Janet Mills adjusted her equipment nervously. She had transcribed thousands of testimonies, but never one quite like this. In the hallway outside, Emma Rodriguez sat in her mother's lap, wearing a carefully chosen pink dress with white flowers that Maria thought would make her daughter look innocent and truthful. Emma's dark hair was styled in 2 neat braids, secured with ribbons that matched her dress. She clutched her stuffed elephant with one hand and held tightly to her mother's fingers with the other. Mia, do you remember what we talked about? Maria whispered softly, her own voice shaking with emotion. 2 months of healing had helped Maria's physical injuries fade, but the emotional scars remained. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights, and she jumped every time someone approached unexpectedly. Emma nodded solemnly. I tell the truth to the nice people about the scary man, and Bruno will be with me. Detective Sarah Walsh approached them, accompanied by Dr. Amanda Foster and Officer Jake Morrison with Bruno. The German Shepherd was wearing his official therapy vest, specially cleaned and brushed for the occasion. His collar bore a small badge, identifying him as a certified courthouse assistance animal, the first of his kind in Arizona. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Dr. Foster asked, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. Over the past month, she had worked intensively with Emma, using art therapy and play therapy to help the little girl process her trauma and prepare for this moment. Emma looked directly at Bruno, who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. I'm scared, but Bruno says it's okay to be scared sometimes. He says brave people get scared too, but they do the right thing anyway. Officer Morrison felt a lump forming in his throat. In his 12 years on the force, he had seen Bruno work with dozens of victims, but the bond between the dog and this tiny girl was something extraordinary. Bruno had been specially prepared for this day 2 extra. Training sessions to ensure he would remain calm and focused in the chaotic courtroom environment. Bailiff Robert Johnson opened the courtroom doors. The court is ready for the witness. The moment Emma entered the courtroom, a hush fell over the packed gallery. News photographers, restricted to the back row, began quietly snapping pictures of the unprecedented scene. Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the formal setting, the high ceiling, the imposing judge's bench, the formal furnishings that made everything seem enormous from a 3-year-old's perspective. But then she saw Bruno, sitting calmly near. The witness stand exactly as they had practiced, and her shoulders relaxed slightly. The dog's presence was like an anchor in the storm of unfamiliar faces and overwhelming formality. Judge Hawkins had ordered special accommodations for Emma's testimony. The witness stand had been modified with a smaller chair and a step stool. Colorful cushions made the formal furniture more child-friendly, and a small table held a box of tissues and a cup of water with a bendable straw. Good morning, Emma, Judge Hawkins said in the gentlest voice she could manage. I'm Judge Hawkins, and I'm very proud of you for being so brave today. Do you see your friend Bruno? Emma's face lit up for the first time since entering the courtroom. Yes, he's right there waiting for me. Prosecutor Lisa Martinez rose from her seat, her heart pounding. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, researching techniques for questioning child witnesses, consulting with experts about age-appropriate language. Everything depended on the next few minutes. At the defense table, Tony Vasquez sat, rigidly, his hands clenched into fists. He wore a conservative suit that his attorney had chosen to make him look respectable, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. This was the moment he had been dreading, facing the tiny witness who could destroy his freedom. Marcus Klein shuffled through his notes one last time, knowing that his cross-examination strategy would need to be dramatically different from his usual aggressive approach. Cross-examining a 3-year-old required delicacy, and he was aware that any appearance of bullying the child would backfire spectacularly with the jury. The 12 jurors, 8 women and 4 men, most of them parents or grandparents themselves, watched with visible emotion as Bailiff Johnson helped Emma climb onto the witness stand. Several jurors were already wiping away tears, moved by the sight of such a small person in such a big, formal space. Bruno moved to his designated spot beside the witness stand, close enough for Emma to reach out and touch him if needed. The dog settled into a perfect downstay position, his intelligent eyes focused on Emma with a kind of devoted attention that spoke of their special bond. Emma, Prosecutor Martinez said softly, can you tell us your name? Emma looked at Bruno, drew a deep breath, and in a clear voice that carried throughout the silent courtroom, she said, "My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm 3¾ years old." The moment that would change legal history had begun. Prosecutor Lisa Martinez approached the witness stand with the careful deliberation of a bomb disposal expert. Every word, every gesture, every inflection had been meticulously planned during countless preparation sessions with child psychology experts. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as she prepared to question the smallest witness in Arizona legal history. "Emma, that's a very pretty dress you're wearing today," Martinez began, her voice warm and conversational. "Did you pick it out yourself?" Emma looked down at her pink-flowered dress, then glanced at Bruno before answering. "Mommy helped me pick it. She said I should wear something nice for the important day." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the courtroom's state-of-the-art sound system carried every word clearly to the jury. Judge Patricia Hawkins watched carefully, ready to intervene if the questioning became too overwhelming for the child. She had studied case law from other states where children Emma's age had testified, and she knew that maintaining the child's comfort was crucial not only for Emma's well-being, but for the validity of her testimony. "Emma, do you know why you're here today?" Martinez asked gently. The little girl nodded, her small hand reaching out to touch Bruno's fur. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, but his tail gave the slightest movement of acknowledgement. "Dr. Foster said I need to tell the truth about the scary night when the bad man hurt Mommy." At the defense table, Marcus Klein scribbled furious notes. Every answer Emma gave was potentially damaging to his client, but he also knew that any objection to questioning a 3-year-old would make him look heartless to the jury. He watched Tony Vasquez, growing more agitated in the chair beside him, sweat beading on his client's forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. Martinez continued her gentle approach. "Emma, do you remember that night? Can you tell us what you were doing before the scary things happened?" Emma's eyes grew distant as she remembered. "I was watching cartoons with Ellie." She held up her stuffed elephant for the courtroom to see. "We were sitting on the couch, and Mommy was making dinner. She was making the noodles I like, the curly ones." Several jurors smiled softly at the innocent detail about curly noodles. Juror number 7, grandmother to a 4-year-old, felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Emma clutch her stuffed animal. "And then what happened?" Martinez prompted carefully. Emma's expression began to change. The lightness in her voice faded, and she unconsciously pressed closer to Bruno. "The man came home. He smelled funny, like the bottles he drinks from. Mommy got scared. I could tell because she made her shoulders go up like this." Emma demonstrated, hunching her small shoulders in a gesture that perfectly captured Maria's fearful posture. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Court reporter Janet Mills typed silently, her professional demeanor masking her emotional response to the child's testimony. "Emma, when you say the man, do you see that person in the courtroom today?" Martinez asked, knowing this identification was crucial. Emma's eyes swept the courtroom, and when they landed on Tony Vasquez at the defense table, her entire body went rigid. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment, everyone feared she might shut down completely. But then Bruno, with perfect timing, shifted slightly and placed his large paw on her lap. The contact seemed to ground Emma. She looked down at Bruno, took a shaky breath, and nodded. "He's sitting right there," she said, pointing directly at Vasquez. "He's wearing different clothes, but it's him. He has the same mean eyes." Vasquez couldn't help himself. He looked directly at Emma, and the hatred in his expression was unmistakable. Several jurors noticed his reaction, and juror number 3, a father of 2 daughters, visibly recoiled from Vasquez's glare. Martinez knew she was walking a tightrope. Emma was doing remarkably well, but she was still a traumatized 3-year-old who could break down at any moment. Emma, after the man came home that night, what happened next? He was angry about the food. Emma said, her voice getting smaller. He yelled at Mommy, and she said she was sorry, but he kept being mean. I got scared, so I hid behind the counter in the kitchen. She pointed to show how she had made herself small. I peeked around to see if Mommy was okay. Dr. Amanda Foster, watching from the gallery, noticed Emma beginning to show signs of distress, rapid breathing, fidgeting, loss of eye contact. She caught Judge Hawkins' attention and made a subtle gesture indicating they might need a break soon. What did you see when you peeked around the counter? Martinez asked, knowing this was the most crucial question. Emma was quiet for a long moment. She buried her face in Bruno's fur, and the dog instinctively moved closer to her, providing more physical comfort. The courtroom waited in absolute silence, understanding that this tiny witness was struggling with memories too terrible for someone her age to possess. When Emma finally lifted her head, there were tears in her eyes, but her voice was surprisingly steady. The man hit Mommy in the face. She made a crying sound and fell down. There was red on her face, blood, I think. The food fell on the floor and made a big mess. Several jurors were now openly crying. The defense attorney Klein wanted to object. The testimony was clearly prejudicial, but he knew that interrupting a crying 3-year-old would be legal and public relations suicide. Emma continued, her words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. Mommy tried to get up, but the man kicked her in the tummy. She curled up like a ball and kept saying, "Please stop, please stop," but he wouldn't stop. He kept hurting her. The courtroom was experiencing something unprecedented, the raw, unfiltered testimony of a child who had witnessed domestic violence. There was no adult interpretation, no legal language, just the simple, devastating truth as seen through innocent eyes. Martinez knew she was reaching the limits of what Emma could handle. "Emma, you're being very brave. What happened next?" "The police came," Emma said, and for the first time since the difficult questions began, a small smile crossed her face. "They had the loud cars with the pretty lights, and they made the scary man go away. And that's when I met Bruno." She looked at the dog with pure love. "He wasn't scary like I thought big dogs would be. He was nice, and he made me feel safe." The foundation had been laid. Emma had identified her attacker and described the violence she witnessed. But everyone in the courtroom sensed that the most powerful moment was yet to come. The courtroom had reached a critical juncture. Emma's testimony had been proceeding steadily for 20 minutes, but Dr. Amanda Foster could see the telltale signs of emotional overload beginning to manifest. The 3-year-old's hands were trembling. Her breathing had become shallow, and she kept looking toward the exit doors as if calculating an escape route. Prosecutor Lisa Martinez recognized the warning signs, too. She had pushed Emma as far as she dared, establishing the basic facts of the assault and the identification of Tony Vasquez as the perpetrator. But there were still crucial details that only Emma could provide details. That would mean the difference between a conviction and Vasquez walking free to hurt someone else. "Emma, sweetheart, are you okay? Do you need some water?" Martinez asked, genuinely concerned about the child's well-being, despite the legal implications. Emma shook her head, but her grip on her stuffed elephant had become white-knuckled. She kept glancing at Bruno, who seemed to sense her escalating distress. The German Shepherd's training kicked in, and he shifted positions slightly, placing himself more directly between Emma and the defense table where Vasquez sat. Judge Patricia Hawkins leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, I think we may need to consider a recess. The witness appears to be experiencing significant stress." But before Martinez could respond, something unexpected happened. Tony Vasquez, who had been growing increasingly agitated throughout Emma's testimony, suddenly stood up from the defense table. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "You're going to convict me based on the fantasies of a 3-year-old? She doesn't know what she saw." "Mr. Vasquez, sit down immediately," Judge Hawkins commanded, but the damage was done. Vasquez's outburst had shattered the careful, protective atmosphere that had been maintained for Emma's testimony. Defense attorney Marcus Klein grabbed his client's arm, trying to force him back into his seat. "Tony, shut up. You're making this worse." But Vasquez was beyond reason. Months of watching his case fall apart, combined with the stress of hearing Emma's devastating testimony, had pushed him over the edge. "She's lying. That little brat is lying about everything." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Bailiff Robert Johnson moved quickly toward the defense table, while Judge Hawkins banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order. Order in this courtroom." But the person most affected by Vasquez's violent outburst was Emma. The 3-year-old witness went completely rigid, her eyes wide with terror, as she stared at the man who had haunted her nightmares. This was exactly the scenario that Dr. Foster had warned about re-traumatization in real time. Emma began to hyperventilate, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but no sound came from her lips. She appeared to be regressing into the same state of shocked silence that had characterized the weeks immediately following the original attack. "Emma, look at me," Dr. Foster called out from the gallery, but the child seemed unable to hear anything over the roar of her own panic. That's when Bruno did something that no one had anticipated, not even his handler, Officer Jake Morrison. The German shepherd, who had been trained to remain in position no matter what happened around him, made a decision that transcended his training. Bruno rose from his downstay position and walked directly to Emma, but instead of simply offering comfort, as he had been trained to do, the massive dog positioned himself squarely between the witness stand and the defense table, effectively blocking Emma's view of Tony Vasquez. Then, in a move that stunned everyone present, Bruno reared up on his hind legs and placed his front paws on Emma's lap, bringing his gentle brown eyes level with hers. The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Even Vasquez stopped shouting, transfixed by the unprecedented scene unfolding before him. Emma's breathing began to slow as she found herself looking directly into Bruno's calm, intelligent eyes. The dog's massive presence filled her entire field of vision, creating a safe bubble around her where the chaos couldn't penetrate. And then, in the profound silence of the courtroom, Emma began to speak. But she wasn't addressing the lawyers, or the judge, or the jury. She was talking directly to Bruno, as if the dog was the only one in the room who could truly understand. "Bruno," she said, her voice small but crystal clear in the amplified silence. "That man is being scary again, just like that night. He's using his angry voice, and it makes my tummy hurt." Officer Morrison started to call Bruno back to position, but Judge Hawkins raised her hand to stop him. Something extraordinary was happening, and she sensed it needed to play out. Emma reached up and touched Bruno's soft ears, drawing strength from the contact. "You remember that night, don't you, Bruno? You remember how scared I was when I was hiding?" The dog's tail wagged slightly, as if he was indeed remembering. Then Emma did something that left every person in that courtroom speechless. She turned slightly in her chair so that she could address the jury while still maintaining contact with Bruno, and her voice took on a strength and clarity that seemed impossible from someone so small. "Bruno says I should tell you the really scary part," Emma announced, looking directly at the 12 jurors. "Bruno says you need to know everything so the bad man can't hurt any more mommies." The courtroom was so quiet that you could hear the ventilation system cycling on and off. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, mesmerized by the unprecedented scene. Emma took a deep breath, drew courage from Bruno's steady presence, and continued. "After the police came that night, when they thought I was sleeping in the ambulance, I heard the bad man talking to another police officer. He wasn't sorry at all. He said, ... Emma paused, struggling with words that were too adult for her vocabulary. He said bad words about Mommy and said he wished he had hurt her worse. The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just testimony about the assault. Itself, Emma had overheard Vasquez making statements that showed malice and intent, statements that could elevate the charges significantly. Prosecutor Martinez felt her heart racing. This was evidence she hadn't even known existed. Emma, are you sure about what you heard? Emma nodded solemnly, still looking into Bruno's eyes for strength. Bruno heard it too. That's why he looked at the bad man the way he did. Bruno knew the man wasn't sorry for hurting Mommy. At that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood that they had just witnessed something far more powerful than testimony. They had witnessed pure truth, delivered through the unbreakable bond between a traumatized child and the therapy dog who had become her voice of courage. The jury deliberation lasted only 47 minutes, a record for a domestic violence case of this magnitude. When the 12 jurors filed back into the courtroom, their faces told the story before the verdict was even read. Several jurors were still visibly emotional from Emma's testimony, and juror number 7, the grandmother who had watched Emma with such protective tenderness, clutched a tissue in her trembling hand. Judge Patricia Hawkins surveyed the packed courtroom one final time before calling for the verdict. Media representatives filled every available seat. Domestic violence advocates stood along the walls, and in the front row, Maria Rodriguez sat with her hands clasped tightly in prayer. Emma was not present for the verdict reading. Dr. Amanda Foster had recommended that the 3-year-old be spared the stress of the final courtroom drama. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Hawkins asked formally. Jury foreman David Martinez, a construction supervisor and father of 2 teenage daughters, stood with the verdict form in his steady hands. We have your honor. The courtroom held its collective breath. Tony Vasquez sat rigidly at the defense table, his cocky demeanor, from months past, replaced by pale-faced anxiety. Defense attorney Marcus Klein had already begun preparing appeals. Paperwork, knowing that Emma's unprecedented testimony had likely sealed his client's fate. On the charge of aggravated domestic violence in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. The word rang through the courtroom like a bell of justice. Maria Rodriguez collapsed into tears of relief, while domestic violence advocates in the gallery exchanged quiet celebrations. But the jury foreman wasn't finished. On the charge of aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily injury, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the additional charge of making terroristic threats, the new charge had been added based on Emma's testimony about overhearing Vasquez's statements to police. Guilty, Your Honor. Tony Vasquez's face crumpled as the reality hit him. This wasn't another slap on the wrist or probation deal. This was real prison time, potentially decades of it. His violent outburst during Emma's testimony had only reinforced the jury's belief in his dangerous character. Judge Hawkins scheduled sentencing for the following month, but everyone in the courtroom knew that Vasquez would be facing the maximum penalty under Arizona's domestic violence statutes. His pattern of escalating violence, combined with Emma's testimony about his lack of remorse, painted the picture of a man who would continue to endanger women until he was stopped. 3 weeks later, the sentencing hearing drew even larger crowds. Judge Hawkins had received dozens of letters from domestic violence survivors, law enforcement officials, and legal experts praising the court's decision to allow Emma's testimony. The case had made national headlines, sparking discussions in state legislatures across the country about expanding the use of therapy dogs in courtrooms. Mr. Vasquez, Judge Hawkins began, her voice carrying the weight of justice. Your pattern of violence against women spans over a decade. The testimony of a 3-year-old child, supported by physical evidence and medical records, has revealed the true extent of your dangerous character. She paused, looking directly at the defendant. The court sentences you to 15 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections, with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. Additionally, you are ordered to complete anger management and substance abuse programs, and you are permanently barred from contacting Maria Rodriguez or her daughter. The gavel fell with finality, and Tony Vasquez was led away in handcuffs. As he passed the gallery, his eyes searched for Maria, but she refused to look at him. That chapter of terror in her life was finally closed. 6 months after the trial, Emma Rodriguez was a different child entirely. The trauma that had once silenced her had gradually given way to healing, supported by continued therapy sessions with Dr. Foster and regular visits from Bruno. The German Shepherd had become something of a celebrity in Phoenix, receiving commendations from the mayor and inspiring the creation of Arizona's first comprehensive courthouse therapy dog program. Emma thrived in her new preschool, making friends easily and displaying the natural curiosity and joy that had been suppressed by her traumatic experiences. Her favorite activity was reading books about brave dogs to her classmates, always mentioning her special friend Bruno, who helped her tell the truth to the important people. Maria had rebuilt her life with remarkable strength. She moved to a safe neighborhood with Emma, returned to school to pursue her nursing degree, and became a volunteer advocate for other domestic violence survivors. The settlement from a civil lawsuit against Vasquez provided financial security, but more importantly, Maria had found her own voice and was using it to help other women escape abusive relationships. The legal precedent set by Emma's testimony had far-reaching implications. Within a year, 12 states had passed legislation explicitly allowing therapy dogs to accompany child witnesses in courtrooms. Legal scholars wrote extensively about the case, and law schools began incorporating animal-assisted testimony protocols into their curricula. Bruno, now officially designated as Arizona's first courthouse therapy dog, worked with dozens of other young victims. Each child he helped reinforce the lesson that Emma had taught the legal system. Sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from the most vulnerable voices, and sometimes those voices need a four-legged friend to help them find the courage to speak. The Phoenix Police Department expanded their victim services program, training 6 additional dogs in courthouse therapy work. Officer Jake Morrison became the program's director, often telling new handlers about the night he first watched terrified 3-year-old reach out to touch Bruno's fur and begin her journey toward healing. On the 2nd anniversary of the trial, Judge Patricia Hawkins received a hand-drawn card from Emma. The picture showed a little girl in a pink dress standing next to a large German Shepherd, both of them smiling. The carefully printed words read, "Thank you for letting Bruno help me be brave. Love, Emma." Judge Hawkins kept that card on her desk, a reminder that justice sometimes comes in unexpected forms, through the innocent eyes of a child and the loyal heart of a dog who understood that protecting the vulnerable is the highest calling of all. Emma's story had become more than a court case. It had become a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds that form between those who protect and those who need protection. In a world often dominated by cynicism and complexity, a 3-year-old girl and her canine guardian had reminded everyone that truth, delivered with love and supported by unwavering loyalty, will always find its voice.